Good morning, everyone. My name is Siobhan Horan and I work for Knowledge Transfer Ireland, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the first webinar in our new Unlocking Knowledge Transfer webinar series. So we've set up this series to discuss key topics relating to the wealth of research expertise and knowledge available in Ireland. And we're also hoping to offer you some insights from entrepreneurs that have engaged with the Irish research system to grow their business. So our topic this morning is around something that's central to everything we do in KTI. It's around the topic of intellectual property. And I'm delighted to be joined by two great speakers this morning. We have Joe Doyle, IP Manager from Enterprise Ireland. We also have Dr. Brendan Boland, CEO of Loci Orthopaedics. Just before I start and pass over to our first speaker, I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So we have muted everyone's microphones throughout this webinar, and we're going to keep them muted, but we would really welcome your questions. So you will find a question box on your screen. So please do submit your questions throughout both presentations, and then we will have a Q&A at the end where your speakers can address any of those questions. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Joe Doyle, who's going to give you an overview of the importance of IP to Irish companies.
Thanks, Siobhan. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. As Siobhan said, my name is Joe Doyle. I'm the IP guy in Enterprise Ireland, and thanks, Siobhan, for the invitation to present here today. So what I'm going to talk about fairly briefly is the importance of IP in fast-growing companies, and I'm going to try, if you're not already aware that it's important, I'm going to try and convince you that it is very important. So I'll start with a little introduction to what Enterprise Ireland is about, in case anybody hasn't heard of us, and why IP is important to what we do. So very briefly, we have a number of priorities. There's Brexit, if anybody remembers that. It hasn't gone away. It's been overtaken by other things, so I'm not going to talk about that. But in terms of our role in developing innovation and diversification in the Irish industry base, that's a very pertinent part of my talk today, and how that contributes to the development of the wider economy. So in Enterprise Ireland, we do a lot of things, and I'm not going to go through them all, you'll be happy to hear, but this slide just summarizes the range of things that we do and the way that we engage with companies and the diversity of our client base. So we can engage with companies from the start right through to established companies, and we engage with them differently across that whole spectrum. We have a very diverse client base across all sectors, about 4,000 active companies. We have a number of metrics and priorities that we need to achieve, as you see there. And we get involved, we get behind a company's business plan in a lot of different ways, from strategy development, obviously providing funding, and a lot of other things that you see along the bottom. So my talk today is that across all of these stages of development in a company, intellectual property plays a role, and I intend to try and lay that out for you, starting with the rather bold statement that IP is actually the foundation of scalable enterprise. So in the next few slides, I'm going to go through some research that hopefully will, I'm going to close my camera here because it's distracting me. So I'm going to go through some research studies in a very top level sort of way, just to highlight some of the data that supports the requirement for state support for IP in companies, in innovative companies. So first of all, this slide here just shows that there has been a shift in the past relatively short period of time, maybe 25 years, toward intangible value. And this was developed by an insurance company. And essentially what this slide shows is that in recent years, there's been an inversion from the corporate value being based on tangibles to it being based on intangibles. And the leading companies now in the world are all of these digital sort of companies that you see down there in the bottom right. So that's a shift that has happened, and it changes the way a business creates and exploits value these days. So these are the large companies. If you think about startups and innovative SMEs, actually the proportion of intangible value in those companies is probably higher. So it's an important shift to bear in mind. In terms of the contribution to GDP, so intangibles, which is largely represented by intellectual property, the industries that are based on IP or intellectual property contribute disproportionately to the GDP, especially in Ireland. You can see it contributes across all countries in the general European region here. But Ireland, we are heavily dependent on IPR intensive industries. So that's a good news story. Long may that continue. But I think you probably can suspect that a lot of that is due to the foreign direct investment companies, like the ones that were represented in the last slide. So how do we look at the indigenous industry base in that context? So this is the European Innovation Scoreboard from last year. Actually, this year's one has just been published, so the data is similar. And what this highlights is that we do well as an innovative economy generally, but drilling down into this metric, which is an annual ranking of European member states in terms of their innovativeness. There's an overall ranking which is made up of 10 individual dimensions. What I want to highlight here is that we do very well in some things, but our worst performing indicator or dimension on this indicator is intellectual assets. And because this data relates mainly to domestic firms, I think that indicates that maybe some work to be done. So what is the story with IP and innovative SMEs? Well, we know this already. Startups, SMEs, and so on are very valuable in the economy, contributing the larger proportion of the overall number of companies, but also the total value add and total employment in the economy. But in terms of IP ownership, we can see that the SMEs are about 4 times less likely to own intellectual property compared to those ones that rather compared to the large companies. But the ones that do own intellectual property tend to exhibit greater growth characteristics and scalability. So there seems to be a correlation between IP ownership and scalability. However, SMEs are not a generic category. There appears to be a relatively small subset of SMEs that exhibit particularly high growth characteristics. Actually, I'm skimming through a lot of research data here, and you'll probably see on the slides that there are embedded links to the report. So if anybody wants to dig any deeper, please be my guest. I'm not going to dig too deep here, but what I want to say is that high growth firms tend to exhibit certain characteristics in that they're innovative and risk taking, they're internationally active, they've stretched resources because of their high growth characteristics, and they tend to be based on human capital, R&D, and intangible assets, aka intellectual property. So these are a really important cohort. And some of the research that came out just last year from the European Patent Office and the EU IPO highlighted that these companies, they took a look back at the companies that had protected their IP from an early stage and how that related to their future growth. And they showed that the companies that protect their IP from an early stage were significantly more likely to exhibit high growth in the future than those that did not protect their IP at an early stage. And that's true across type of IP, product, and in terms of the IP strategy. So I'm not going to get into that detail. I just want to flash it up there in front of you. But a key point from this is that companies that have a broad-based IP strategy, in other words, that they protect IP across the different features, innovative features of their products and business, tended to exhibit the best growth. So there's a message there for us in terms of how we define a support and design a support for SMEs and startups in Ireland. So this has led to us launching the IP strategy offer about 1.5 years ago, and that's been rolled out now. We're making some tweaks to it. But I just want to highlight what that is and why we have launched that new offer. It's a grant scheme for R&D active companies. First of all, in terms of the context, intangible assets, intellectual property, tend to exhibit different economic properties to tangibles. So they don't get used up when they're used. So they're scalable by definition. A tangible asset gets used up when it's used, but an intangible asset, the more it's used, the more value it creates. But they tend to have a high degree of sunkenness. In other words, they have to be invested in upfront for a return that comes some point down the future. They tend to create more spillovers, positive and negative, in terms of positive spillovers into new technologies spilling over into new applications and fields, and negative in terms of spilling over into competitors' portfolios. They also enable greater synergies where innovation is protected. It's made available for synergy with other protected innovation and so on. So it's got these different characteristics, so it has to be treated somewhat differently. And it means that we need a different approach, which means that we have decided to adopt an approach based on IP strategy. I'm not going to go into each of these, but suffice to say that there are a lot of good reasons why a company needs an IP strategy to continue running their business, to raise investment, to create competitive advantage, and create value. So the IP strategy offer is focused on achieving that, and it's focused on achieving that with R&D active companies. So this is an overview of how we have for a long time supported companies around R&D and continue to do so. The new IP strategy offer is brought in under the EI R&D supports to companies as an additional aid to help the company develop an IP strategy around its R&D projects and to build an IP strategy into its innovation strategy as part of its growth plan for the company. The offer has two main objectives. First one is to support companies to access the external expertise they need to develop their IP strategy, but also to develop the internal IP awareness and capability so the company can take more ownership of their IP strategy and essentially be less reliant on that external expertise in the long term. Very brief overview of the scheme in terms of eligibility. It's available to Irish companies that are SMEs, that are internationally trading, that are R&D active, and that have a need for IP support. So essentially, it basically describes the type of high growth firm that was identified by the European Patent Office and EU IP report I mentioned earlier. There are two grants in the scheme, a small one and a big one. The small grant is there as a large grant rate, but a relatively low grant to enable companies to address a specific immediate need. The larger grant is to help companies to develop a more detailed IP strategy, and that gives a 50% grant towards an expenditure of 35,000 on IP expertise and 35,000 on developing an internal IP champion. There's some information there on those links. There's an expression of interest form. I believe everyone will get a copy of these slides. I hope they do. If they don't, please email me and I can send any information. And I'd be very happy to hear from any company that's interested in applying for that scheme, or indeed just want to talk about what their IP strategy might be. So that's really all I have to say. I will, I think, pass back now to Siobhan, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Brilliant, thank you for that, Joe. And just to clarify that the slides will be made available to everyone at the end of this presentation. And also, we are recording this webinar, so if you are having any problems with audio or with your screen or anything like that, it happens a lot with webinars, we will make that available at the end of the session, so you will have a copy of that. So with that, we have Brendan Boland here, who has successfully licensed IP from the research system and used that to build a successful company. So he's going to share his experiences with you now, and I'm going to pass over to Brendan.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. So thank you everybody for tuning into the webinar this morning, and for KTI asking me to be part of it. Just to give you a little bit of background, I suppose my background isn't traditionally from an IP or R&D background. I trained as a medical doctor, qualified in 2006, and then practiced for 7 years up to 2013. And in 2013, I was fortunate enough to be taken on to the BioInnovate Fellowship Program, and that's where I met my current co-founder, Jerry Clark, and we obviously went on to found Loci Orthopaedics together. During the BioInnovate program, we identified a major unmet clinical need that we thought has a really big market potential and something that we're really interested in following on and further developing. And to that end, we were supported by Enterprise Ireland via commercialisation fund through NUI Galway, where we were based from 2015 to 2017. And that's where we founded our company and spun out from NUI Galway. So I suppose today I'm going to provide a little bit of a case study based on how companies can harness the value of their IP. Specifically, as in, we are a small startup. So, hopefully it's somewhat of relevance to academia, people in academia who are thinking of doing startups, to startups themselves, or even to larger industries who are looking at working with SMEs or with academia. So to that end, I'll speak a little bit about core IP development, further IP development within the company, and then how we all pay for this and how you balance out the costs versus the value creation. So as I mentioned, we were based in, and similar to Joe, I'm going to just take off my camera so we're a little bit less distracted. So we were based in NUI Galway from 2015 to 2017, and then spun out a company in June of 2017. At this point, we took an IP license, agreed an IP license with NUI Galway for a core technology, which was for the index implant. The index implant is the implant that we're developing for the treatment of thumb-based joint arthritis, a remarkably common condition and quite a big market. It's in the orthopedics extremity space of small bones, so a very, very rapidly growing area of orthopedics. But obviously, as medical devices, IP and IP protection is of key importance in the development, excuse me, of medical devices and the protection of your product and your product portfolio. To that end, when we spun out of NUIG, as I said, we took an exclusive license for that technology and closed a pre-seed funding round to coordinate with that. So to that end, as in our investors, investors believe in the team as well as the product, but they want to understand and have to ensure that the product that you're developing or going to develop is one that can be protected or reasonably protected from competitors or anyone else who might think that they have the same idea. From a company point of view, obviously we're passionate about developing IP and really see the power of IP and the value of IP development for SMEs and startup companies. So from day one, we started to look at our own in-house development of IP as well. To that end, in June 2018, we then closed a seed funding round from our group of investors of 2.75 million euros. And at this point, you'll notice that we had a license for the IP, which had been filed and published for the implant technology, but had yet to be granted. So I guess first of all, investors do understand that it is a longer road to filing IP to actually getting it granted, but at the same time, how important it is that such IP is in place and is on the pathway to being secured in order to be able to leverage private funding. Similarly to that end, in the end of 2018, we were made aware that we were going to be granted a fast-track innovation grant, which was worth 2.5 million euros to the development of the index implant from the European Commission. Again, this was based on the IP which we had developed and were in the process of filing. To one of Joe's points earlier on, we availed then of the IP START grant in order for us to be able to begin putting in place an in-house IP development strategy and a management strategy, which was pretty good timing because in April 2019, our US patent was granted, which was obviously for a small company such as ourselves on which our core product is developed was a huge milestone for us and a huge relief. To that end, obviously then, we have to protect that core IP and ring fence that IP. So, companies have to continue on with European validations, as in where it's filed in each country, as well as divisional. So as I said, ring fencing the core IP. So at the moment, we have 2 US divisional files, or there have been 2 US divisional files, and 1 European divisional filed on that patent to further, extend the breadth of the patent, the value of the patent, and then also as well to ring fence it to provide further support to the value of that patent. I guess, you know, patenting is one of those things that you can't just patent and just leave it sit there. It has to be maintained on an ongoing basis. But not only that, as in it has to be maintained in a very strategic basis so the company doesn't inadvertently spend money that it may not, you know, have, or sign up to having potential bills that it may not be able to meet in the future. So I guess to that end, that's where the IP strategy that Joe was talking about is of key importance. Having said that, you know, we are, you know, obviously very passionate about developing IP in-house, but also taking the opportunity to utilize and leverage other IP, which is of benefit to the company. So OsteoAnchor is a technology which was developed by Dr. Noel Harrison in NUI Galway and his team there. It's a 3D printed surface morphology to help implants integrate better into bone. So we spoke with Noel and NUI Galway about that technology because we felt that it was one that would really have a synergistic effect with our own company, in that orthopedic extremities, the area that we're in orthopedic extremities, is the fastest growing area of orthopedic medicine. But then additive manufacturing, 3D printing, is a huge growth area in orthopedic medicine. So the two of them together, you know, really provided the company with a lot of potential development pathway into the future. So we licensed as an SME, so as industry, so wearing our industry hat now, we went and then licensed that technology from NUI Galway in 2019. To further help develop that then, Enterprise Ireland supported us through an innovation partnership programme, which is a 80-20 funded programme from Enterprise Ireland for industry, local orthopaedics, to be able to work with academia. So we continue now to work with Dr. Harrison's lab in NUI Galway on that technology, further developing potential IP out of it, as well as building more value around a potential product there. Joe spoke briefly, or at the end there, I should say, on the IP Plus grant. So the IP strategy offer, as he noted, was made up of the IP Start grant and now the IP Plus grant as well, which we've also been fortunate enough to be granted there in June of 2020. This very much, to Joe's point, allows us to put in place a company strategy, a fixed company strategy, to really maximize the IP out of the company. And to that end, it's quite good timing. The Chinese Patent Office have granted the index implant patent, as has the European Patent Office. The first fruits of our own in-house IP development are starting to show, and with the granting of our first US patent for what we'll call Loci 01, our first in-house patent. So to that end, as in, we can see how important you know, spinning all of these plates is, and how, you know, if it's done appropriately, it can add real value to a small startup company such ourselves. So briefly, and to kind of finish up on, I just wanted to touch on 4 key points that I think are important when we look at harnessing IP value for both academia, and by that I mean as in, you know, academia harnessing the value of their IP by licensing it into industry, harnessing IP value from a startup point of view, and how, you know, that can allow the company to grow and grow, you know, significantly and grow rapidly. But then also for industry, being able to harness the value of IP that has been created in academia, and how that can be then leveraged back into co-development deals or into the company itself. So from a startup point of view, you know, we feel that IP adds quite a significant amount of value to the company. So at this stage, we have 2 exclusive licenses from NUI Galway, first granted in-house patent for the company, 2 more patents filed, and 5 more in development, which I guess, you know, isn't too bad for a company that's a little shy of 3 years old. From our own area, I guess, orthopedics extremities, small bone orthopedics is, as I mentioned, a very rapidly growing area. So one in which, you know, the IP portfolio is very valuable for strategic partners or potential acquirers or whoever may be looking at the company in the future. You know, that IP is perhaps even of more value because it's core fundamental IP, as opposed to add-on IP in a potentially saturated area such as hip and knee implants or whatever the case may be. Similarly, and unfortunately, COVID has had a major impact on medical devices and medtech companies across the world over the last number of months. R&D has been undoubtedly affected, but to that end, I think that having good IP filed, in process, or granted actually adds even more value potentially for other companies that want to co-develop or work together with small enterprises or academia where their own R&D pipelines may have been interrupted, and hence they may be more likely to do kind of co-development or strategic development undertakings with smaller companies, and hence adding a greater importance to IP development for those smaller companies. From an in-house competency point of view, the company, I think we've tried to add a lot of value in our own IP strategy. So ensuring that we have a really good plan in place to identify all IP, identify all of those intangible assets that Joe mentioned previously, and really build value around that, ensuring that we file what has to be filed in an appropriate manner and at the appropriate time in a fiscally competent strategy to ensure that we really grow as a small enterprise without obviously, having an albatross around our neck unnecessarily. To that end, we spend a lot of time working on our own IP management to ensure the actual administration of them is appropriately managed. And that's where I think the Enterprise Ireland IP strategy offer is really an interesting opportunity and a great mechanism that can be utilized by small enterprises such as ourselves to put that in place. The actual applications aren't very complicated, and I definitely recommend anybody listening in today to have a look at the information on that. On that point, Joe and Enterprise Ireland, the IP team there in Enterprise Ireland, have also actually put together a very useful summary document for all IP supports that are available from Enterprise Ireland. So I think I might ask Joe to share that as well if he's sharing his own slides. From our own company point of view, I guess, one of the harnessing IP value, harnessing IP value is often in the form of funding. So as we can see from the kind of, I suppose, the case study I hope to have provided is that we've used the IP that we've developed to leverage private funding from investors, as well as grant funding in the form of the Fast Track Innovation from the European Commission. The IP funding supports, such as those, as I mentioned, from Enterprise Ireland, have been used then to facilitate the growth of our IP portfolio and the strategy around that growth, which has then enabled us to, develop really good high quality IP, which allows us then to, leverage further private and grant funding. So I think it becomes a very positive cycle, which I think a lot of small companies should really look at the supports that are available in order to be able to maximize that. From our own point of view, I think, asked to speak today because I think, we provide a case study on a number of different things in that we have been university researchers who developed intellectual property, spun out of university, and then you harness the value of that IP to start a company. We've also then been a SME who has gone back and harnessed the value of IP developed by NUI Galway and brought it into our own company to further increase our value. To that end, I think sometimes people think that it's a rather complex mechanism, licensing from third-level institutions and whatnot. KTI obviously have the National IP Protocol in place, which provides a really good roadmap to what can be expected from both sides. So what industry are going to be expecting or can expect from academia and vice versa. I think it kind of provides a general roadmap as to how industry and academia can work together, as well as how academics can utilize the IP that is being developed in the university to spin out companies. I think Siobhan will make available all connections to those resources and links to those resources, including the various different IP development portals that are available. And I believe Siobhan is also this as part of a larger webinar series will follow up with more information on the webinars that are to come on industry, academia, partnerships, etc. So briefly, just to finish up today, and thank you for your time again, harnessing the value of IP, I think it has to be done from day one in any spin-out company, and I think it's something that is very worthwhile doing. I think people should look at harnessing the value of IP from various different mechanisms, in that there is fantastic IP that has been developed and has been developed in third level institutions that, you know, people developing it may not necessarily want to commercialize. So to that end, I would encourage all industry participants on today's webinar to engage with third level institutions in Ireland to see what IP is there that they may be in a better position to commercialize. And then I suppose from an academia point of view, and to this end, academia and taxpayers and government, you know, by licensing and spinning out technologies out of the university, that has a great potential to feed back into the university, both in terms of funding, revenue generation, etc., but also the international standing of the university. So sometimes harnessing IP can be best achieved by actually letting it go out of the university. So there are just a couple of points for consideration to leave you on. And thank you all again for your time. And I'll hand back now to Siobhan to go into the Q&A, I believe.
Brilliant. So with that, I'm going to invite Joe to turn his camera on as well. So we're going to have a look through some of the questions that you've submitted throughout the morning. And thank you for your questions. We've got quite a few in. Before we start, I just want to kind of summarize that it's great to see Brendan mentioning the National IP Protocol. That is the national policy for research commercialisation in Ireland. And it's a very valuable document. We're one of few countries in the world that has a national policy dedicated to this area. And it really sets out in very clear language what the roles of each of the different actors involved in research commercialisation from third level are. So if you are new to research commercialisation and knowledge transfer, I would definitely advise you to have a look at this document, have a look at the simple guide that we have available through KTI. We also have some model agreements available for anyone that's interested in licensing technologies out. So these are all available to download from our website. They just give you a clear idea of the type of terms that are included in these agreements, and it just ensures that you're kind of on the same starting point as the people within the universities and the technology transfer offices. We also have a guide on a simple guide to IP and confidentiality. So that's the end of my plugs for the KTI supports, but definitely worth having a look on our website to check those out. So there's quite a few questions for both our speakers this morning. Joe, since you spoke first, I'm going to go to you first. There's some questions about the eligibility criteria for the IP strategy offer. If an SME meets all 5 eligibility points, do they have to be an EI client to avail of this offer?
No, not necessarily. In fact, they need to be a client of Enterprise Ireland, a local enterprise office, or Údarás na Gaeltachta, and they have to be an internationally traded service or manufacturing company. Now, there's a little bit, because this is a new offer, there are a few process glitches that we're ironing out as we go along. So each of the agencies, like the LEOs and the Údarás na Gaeltachta, have their own application processes and evaluation processes and so on, and they have to be aligned with all of the grant schemes that they offer. So because this is a new one, those processes aren't altogether up and running just yet, but we are accepting applications from those sort of companies as well, with just a little bit of a headache around the administration. But long way of saying not necessarily an EI client.
So anyone that has questions about the eligibility or questions around the IP strategy offer, we can put you in touch directly with Joe after the webinar as well, if you want to go through these.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
There's a question from one of your colleagues within Enterprise Ireland. Do you have a listing of IP experts that are available for clients?
Yes, we do. We have we're developing an IP advisor directory. Now, I have to be careful with that, because we don't have a criterion or anything to evaluate, you know, an IP advisor against another. So it's not recommendations. But I get asked the question very often, you know, about who can I work with to do whatever this IP issue is, and the automatic reaction in that situation often is to say, well, you know, you need a patent attorney. But that isn't always true. If you need a patent attorney, you definitely need a patent attorney. But companies have other IP needs, and they may need an IP strategy sort of person. They might need somebody that's a trademark specialist, or they might need a legal advisor to help around agreements and things like that. So the IP advisor directory that we're putting together is to compile, it's an opt-in list by IP advisors. And the idea is to compile a list of examples of the sorts of service providers that are out there, rather than an approved supplier list or a list of recommendations. Ultimately, if a company applies for the scheme, they have the responsibility to identify the advisor that they're going to work with. So the directory is there as an aid to that. The other thing, there's on the IP Office of Ireland, formerly the Patent Office website, there are lists of registered patent attorneys and trademark attorneys. So there is information out there on where to find advisors. I can't recommend anybody, but it can be useful to have a conversation around what the specific needs of the company are, and then maybe kind of guide in the direction of a type of advisor. Yeah.
Brilliant. And on that, there's a question for Brendan on building your IP management expertise. Was that something that you built internally, or did you hire someone externally to help you with that?
So to date, Siobhan, it's been something that we've built internally. So I've been very fortunate to found the company, Loci Orthopaedics. Jerry Clark, my co-founder, has a wealth of knowledge and extensive experience working in medical devices nationally and internationally. And I think if anybody is ever up in the visitor centre in Medtronic and they see their patent wall, they won't have any difficulty picking Jerry's name out of that patent wall. So to that end, as in, you know, Jerry's had quite a bit of experience himself in patenting. Growing it though, as in from an SME, provides new challenges in that, you know, Medtronic has a much bigger, or, you know, those large companies have a far bigger patent budget than, you know, startups and SMEs. So to that end, our strategy has had to be built from the ground up and from day one, whereby we have had to try and identify what patents need to be filed, when, in what jurisdictions, what timing, etc., to really ensure we're maximizing value without overspending. I think, as in into my timeline slide, you'll see at the moment we've got quite a number of plates spinning in the air on technology, core technology, as well as licensed technology, as well as in-house technology. And I suppose to that end, that's where the IP Plus grant and the IP strategy offer that's provided by Enterprise Ireland is really useful. Under that, it gives us the opportunity then to work with an external IP consultant to, you know, help formalize that IP management structure within the company, to ensure that we capture all of those tangible and intangible assets, as well as with some of the administration. So I think it's good timing as we grow out that strategy and really kind of embed it within the structure of the company. So to answer the question, I was very fortunate with who I was working with, but to date, all of our IP strategy has been organic. But now with the IP strategy offer, we hope to really embed that into a very formulaic process within the company from here out.
And there's another question for you, Brandon, as well, about the original IP that you licensed out from NUI Galway. So did you have any input into the development of that IP, or was it developed in isolation? Sure.
No, so the first IP that we developed for the implant for the thumb-based joint arthritis, so Jerry and I, as research fellows in NUIG, have been working on that technology for 2 years. So we developed that technology as researchers in NUIG and are, you know, named inventors on that patent. So we knew that technology, we knew that market inside out, and hence we were able to we had the confidence, Siobhan, really, that that technology was worth taking out and forming a spin out around. So that was technology that we had worked on from the get-go.
And I have a question coming in as well, which I would really appreciate both your views on. People are asking about confidentiality in IP. When you are speaking to state agencies, when you're speaking to people within the university, how do you ensure that you have confidentiality around your project?
So I suppose I'll touch on that briefly, Siobhan, first. So I guess from our point of view, you know, given the fact that the core IP that we were developing was when we were researchers with NUIG, as in, so we had we were NUIG employees and had the backing of NUIG to that end, and that's where I suppose the innovation offices and the tech transfer offices really provide those supports through NDAs or consultancy agreements and whatnot. So it's something not to be overlooked for researchers within academic settings to be able to utilize the supports of their innovation offices to overcome that, because usually the innovation office will have any NDAs or consultancy agreements that are required. Obviously then as an independent company, as a startup, that's somewhat different. Then obviously we're reliant on our own legal advice and our own legal documents to ensure that we have confidentiality there. I believe, Siobhan, and you might be able to provide a little bit more on that, but I know that we've looked at the KTI documents around confidentiality and how confidentiality can be managed. So KTI have good resources there for people with those questions, and I know perhaps you might want to make those documents available as well to anybody who's interested in those confidentiality queries. But to that end, it is a fine balance. You don't always want to, hide the concept from people. And sometimes, while IP is extremely important, I think you do have to understand the fine line that you walk between what is actually the innovative step or the inventive step versus being able to give someone enough information that they can fully assess what you're talking about. So it is a fine line, but for anybody in academia, I would recommend that they utilize the supports of their own innovation office in order to make those first steps.
So I'll add a little bit to that. I obviously agree with all of that. It's a very important issue and sometimes not always addressed up front when it should be. So as Brendan said, within the academic sector, there are technology transfer offices and KTI and so on to support the people there to understand what's involved there. But I find a lot private companies that don't have access to that sort of backup support may sometimes be maybe over cautious or not cautious enough, and so it's difficult to know where to draw that balance on confidentiality. There are a couple of reasons that it's very important. One is if you disclose your idea in a conversation to somebody, then that's a disclosure. It's potentially your idea is therefore out in the public in some form or another. And when your idea is out in the public, it's not patentable. So that's one good reason to bear in mind confidentiality when you're dealing with any third party. Now, you mentioned the agencies actually, like Enterprise Ireland and so on. We don't sign non-disclosure agreements because we're bound by legislation that's stronger than any non-disclosure agreement to respect the confidentiality of what our clients say to us. So that's our bread and butter. We always respect confidentiality. But if you're dealing with another private entity, it's really important, and it's important sometimes to get a bit of advice on your non-disclosure agreement that you engage another company with. It's a very important tool. It's one of those things that you maybe will never be able to wag it in the face of anybody to say you signed this, but you still have to do it. It's just one of those things you have to make best efforts to protect the confidentiality around your innovation and your inventions and so on. So it's a good idea to do a good job of it. And the models on the KTI website, and there are other resources. I think the IPR help desk in the EU, that's iprhelpdesk.eu, had very good information resources there as well. But you need to look at your confidentiality from the point of view of not disclosing, or rather disclosing what you need to disclose, and being aware of what you don't want to disclose. Because there's another form of intellectual property called trade secrets, which is of increasing importance, especially for SMEs. And a trade secret can be patentable material, but is just not patented. So that needs to be kept secret within the company. And to do that, there's an awful lot more than just a non-disclosure agreement required. You need to have employment agreements that make employees aware and responsible for the information that they have on behalf of the company, but also engagements with third parties. When you share information with third parties, you have to be really careful that you only share the information that you need to share and that you do it under a structured agreement. So there's quite a bit to it, and it is important, but it's down to the internal IP management that Brendan referred to.
Great, and with that, I'm going to bring our Q&A session to a close this morning. We've kind of reached our allocated time for the webinar. There are some questions that we haven't managed to get to this morning. So what we're going to do is I'm going to put them to the speakers after the webinar, and we will issue an FAQ document, so we will get you the answers to those. And similarly, if there's any questions that you think of after the webinar that you didn't manage to ask, please do email them through to KTI and we can get you the relevant information on that. Our next webinar is going to be on the 11th of August at the same time, and we are going to explore the world-class R&D supports available through the Technology Gateway system in Ireland. So we will have some speakers on that topic, and we hope you can join us at that. So I really just want to thank our speakers this morning, Joe Doyle from Enterprise Ireland and Brenda Boland from Loci Orthopaedics, and we will leave it at that. Thank you very much for attending our webinar this morning. We hope you have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks, Siobhan. Thanks, everybody. Take care.